So let's get started because today is going to be exciting. Today, we are going to be using a technique called glazing on this monochrome portrait. Now, it all has to start with me explaining what is glazing and how is it different from the regular color application that we are used to seeing when we paint. So let's start by how we mix colors in a standard world. In a standard world, being the professional painters that we are very attentive to exactly what color we want to mix, and we mix it on the palette in a perfect way, and then we just put it on the painting in a relatively opaque way. Now, that is exactly not what's going to happen in glazing, because in glazing, we are actually mixing colors on the palette that would per se be completely incorrect. However, we are going to take into account the fact that because we are applying these colors to the painting transparently, everything that's happening on the painting right now is going to be factored into this equation and making that color work. So in effect, we're not only mixing the colors on the palette, we're mixing the colors on the palette and then on the painting. So in many ways, it sounds a little bit more difficult than mixing colors in a standard way, which is what I usually teach. But in effect, you're going to discover that it's much, much, much easier. And now I'm going to explain why that is and go a little bit into detail about the benefits of glazing and the disadvantages of glazing. So let me just ask, before I go into my speech about this, Razlin, is everything good on the chat? People are having a good time? Nobody's having issues?
We are all good, no issues.
That is fantastic. I love hearing that. So, thumbs up to everybody. Now let's put our concentration cap on and let's get cracking. So, what you see that is already present on my painting surface is I've already established a lot of the properties that are necessary for me to, achieve a degree of realism that I'm satisfied with. Namely, what I already have on my paper is my values. My values are there. When I say values, I mean a correct distinction, a correct separation between the areas that are light, the areas that are dark, and the varying degrees between that light and the dark, from the areas that are exceptionally light, right here, which we will call around value 9, all the way to the areas that are very dark over here, which is around value 0. All this was accomplished in the previous lesson when we mixed the complete value range from 0 to 10 and divided all of our values across our painting from the areas that are lightest to the areas that are darkest. If you missed last lesson and you want to watch it, you want a link, I'll tell you how to do that later. You can email me at info@kengoshen.com and I'll be happy to help you out with that. So as a result of already having my values, what happens when I'm applying glazes to this monochrome value study is that I don't need to worry about values anymore in the colors that I'm mixing. Now, this might not sound like much, but in fact is revolutionary because value is the most important part of the color equation. When I am mixing colors, the first question that I always have to ask is, what's the value? Meaning the color that I'm mixing now, how dark or how light should it be? The fact that I've already have those values established on my monochrome and I can take out the value from the equation of how am I supposed to mix my colors makes it so much easier for me to approach this painting comfortably and know that at least the values are not gonna go out of control. Now, that's not what would happen if I were to approach this by using what we call direct painting, in which I mix all the colors independently on the palette in an opaque way, because if I mix my colors in an opaque way, I can absolutely destroy my value range. Let's say that I mix an opaque color and put it over here and it's the incorrect value, then I've messed up my value range. But because I'm planning to apply my colors in a glaze, which means I'm applying them very transparently, the values from underneath are going to be preserved. Hence, taking all of my value concern off the table, making it a lot more easy for me to be able to mix the correct colors. Now I know what you're asking. You're asking, Ken, so if in fact value is off the table, what are the remaining color concerns that you still have? What are you still thinking about when you're going to be choosing the colors for this portrait? Well, I'm glad you asked. So the two remaining concerns that I have are chroma and hue. And I'm going to explain them briefly so that you can follow along with what I'm doing. Hue is the most intuitive one. It's whether the color is red, yellow, blue, green, purple, orange, all these colors that we know. So when I look over here, since I don't have to ask myself how light or how dark, I want to ask myself, what hue is it? And identify that hue. Now, the even more important question is the question of chroma. Chroma is something that beginner painters have a hard time understanding, so I'm going to try to make sure that everybody's following along. Chroma is the degree to which a color is intense, the degree to which the color is saturated, or most accurately put, the degree to which a color is far away from a neutral gray. The more muted a color is, the lower the chroma of the color is. So for example, right now, the majority of this painting is at around chroma 0. We don't have any saturation here yet, except for maybe in these few parts where the burnt umber is kind of making a warmer thing happen. But the majority of the painting is very gray. The farther and farther away from gray we go, the higher the chroma is. So if I were to look at my reference image right now, and I were trying to identify where are the most chromatic areas, I would say the ear is very chromatic because the red there is intense. There is a pretty chromatic red happening here, right next to the nose, pretty chromatic red happening here under the eye, and of course there's a relatively chromatic red happening here in the lips. And also there's a little decoration on his coat here, which is relatively high chroma red. So this is very important to me because I still have to have value chroma control despite the fact that my values are already established. Luckily, and I'm sure you understand this, because my monochrome structure is close to being chroma 0, is so gray, when I want to make a grayer glaze on my painting, all I have to do is put less glaze on it. Because if I just leave it completely devoid of glaze, what's going to remain is very close to chroma 0. So in essence, in order to control my chroma, I can just modulate the amount of paint that I'm putting on my painting and let the monochrome grisaille understructure shine through. That would be one way to control the chroma. Another way is, of course, to control it on the palette. Now, to anybody who's still hungry for color theory and chroma control, since today I have to demonstrate how the glaze actually looks like, I don't have too much time to get more in depth into that, but I'm teaching a full color theory and palette navigation lesson on Tuesday. So if you're interested in the Tuesday color theory lesson, again, you can email me at info@kengoshen.com, and I'll be very, very happy to see you again on Tuesday. But now I'm really excited to show you how these glazes actually operate on the surface of the painting, and I'm super confident that if anything I've said so far made very little sense, it's going to start making more sense when you actually see it in action. So let's do a quick pause and ask Raslin, how's the text doing? Are we following along?
Yes, can you hear me actually?
Yes, I can. I hear you perfectly.
Perfect. So we did have one question about what the difference is between an underpainting and grisaille. I'm not sure if you had already addressed that or not.
Yes, so this happened in the previous lessons, and I'm going to address it briefly. An underpainting is what we usually do to start a painting, and it's usually the layer that we do before the grisaille. The difference between the two is that grisaille is a much more sophisticated layer with much more possibilities in terms of value control and texture control, because in an underpainting, I don't actually mix the different values on the palette, but rather I mix them directly on the painting. I create value variation by using solvent, and the transparency of the solvent makes some areas darker and some areas lighter. So actually, in an underpaintings, there's barely any palette navigation happening whatsoever. It's a much more limited form of creating a layout, but the benefit of it is that it's erasable and that it's quick. So you start quick and erasable with an underpainting, you let it dry, and then you strengthen up your structure with a grisaille. Hope that makes sense. And if that's the extent of our question, I'm really excited to be jumping in. So I hope everybody's able to see this screen where you can see my palette. So it's important to me that you know what pigments I've selected to work from, because you're going to see me reach out to them, and I want you to know what I've selected to lay out there. So we have white. I use flake white, but it's very fine to use other kinds of white. Titanium white works well. I personally don't like zinc white, but yeah, so any white that you want. I have ivory black. I have burnt umber. I have raw umber, viridian green, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, Venetian red, yellow ochre, cadmium red light, and this orange is not pure pigment. It's just a mixture between my yellow ochre and my cadmium red light. I like making that middle orange because I find it very, very useful. I don't want to put a cadmium orange on here because cadmium orange is very aggressive, but the kind of orange that's created between cadmium red light and yellow ochre, I find that orange to be very, very useful. All right, so as I'm glazing, you're going to be noticing that what happens to the colors on the painting is that they get mildly darker. They drop in value a little bit. And because I know that that's happening, it's beneficial for me to start my glazes from the shadow. Why is that? Because if I started my glazes from the lights and my lights were to drop in value a little bit, then my contrast is going to be severely compromised because my lights would drop in value, they would start to look more similar to the shadows, and I would be in trouble. So if anything should drop in value first, I prefer that the shadows drop in value so that I maintain my contrast, and then I'll do the same thing to my lights. So it would be a good guessing game for you to play with yourself before I go into any area that I'm planning to glaze and guess how I'm going to mix it, and then see if you were right. So what I'm folding in my hands right now is a paper towel, which is exceedingly important when you're glazing because the amount of material that is constantly on your brush is a very, very important factor. So paper towel, always handy. And I want to start by identifying the fact that the shadows look overall orange to me with a chroma that is surprisingly high. So for that, I'm going to dip into my medium, and I'm going to start with my trusty old pal, burnt sienna. But burnt sienna does look to me like it has a little bit too much chroma. So I'm going to introduce a little bit of burnt umber into the mix to see if it could neutralize it a little bit. And let's see what that gives us. So that is pretty satisfactory. Now, some areas in these shadows are a little bit more red, and those areas we're going to modify by using a touch of a more reddish pigment. You can look at my palette and try to guess. You guessed it right. It's Venetian red. So Venetian red is going to be introduced in order to express some of those more reddish areas. Now, you might notice already, but I think it might be a little premature, but eventually what you're going to notice is this is as close as painting gets to working with a coloring book, because for better or for worse, my glazing technique does not have the ability to really modify all the shapes that I've established in my Grisaille. So if my shapes are wrong, I'm kind of in trouble. But if my shapes are right, then party time for me, because my shapes are going to be mostly preserved, and I'm going to be able to just identify these colors and just color them in a super easy and satisfying way. So I'm kind of skipping that eye because I don't really want to make that eye red. That would kind of make me slightly unhappy. And as you notice, the edge of the face is a more neutral color that is, instead of leaning towards orange, leans more towards yellow. So for that, I'm going to dip into my medium, take some yellow ochre and some raw umber in order to neutralize that chroma a little bit more. Razan, how are we doing on question?
We're doing great.
People following? Oh,
We're following, yep.
beautiful. You guys are a super attentive group. I'm really happy to have you. Thank you again for signing up for this lesson. Really appreciate it. If you want to see how this continues next week, you can navigate to the CCS website and sign up for the next lesson, where I'm going to be doing more color shenanigans on this portrait and explaining the entire process. And again, if you want to hop on to the Tuesday color theory lesson, that one is booked through my website directly at kengoshen.com/lessons. That's kengoshen.com/lessons. And thanks again to CCS for hosting me for this awesome lesson experience. Now, there's only so much that I can hold off on getting that eye in there. I'm just trying not to overwhelm that area before I get the red to play the role that it needs to play. So I'm going to finish up the more reddish areas, and then I'm going to go into the eye. And if there are questions about that, I'll be happy to take them.
So we do have some questions about what medium you are using and how do you decide the ratio?
Okay, beautiful question. So the medium that I'm using, I currently have two mediums on my palette. I have Galkid Slow Dry, which is a liquid medium, and I have here on the side Neal Magnet, which is a gel medium. And the decision of the ratio has to do with how the paint is being applied to the surface. So I test, and I constantly dry my brush if I feel like it has too much medium or too much paint. And these decisions really have to be made on the spot, depending on the kind of surface that you're using. So for example, right now, I'm using a surface that's exceedingly absorbent. It's drinking up my medium like crazy. So it's allowing me, or it's not really allowing me, it's forcing me to use more medium than I would need to use if I were, for example, working on wood. If I'm working on sealed wood that doesn't really drink as much medium as this surface does, then I would have to really modify my approach and use a lot less medium. So in effect, you want to judge the ratio of medium to paint based on the outcome that you're getting on your painting, and that outcome is going to be determined by the kind of painting surface that you're working on. So you always want to think about these things in a non-dogmatic way and in a way that is sensitive to the changing nature of different painting surfaces. Does that answer your question?
I believe there was just one person that didn't catch the mediums that you had mentioned.
So it's called Galkid Slow Dry, and the other one is called Neal Magnet. Now, since I cannot spell them right now, you could email me at info@kengoshen.com, and I will send you exactly the spelling of these two items. I'll be happy to do it. Just can't quite do it right now. But also, I think it's important to say that CCS is also offering a great variety of mediums. And maybe Razlan can tell you what she's using to glaze, because I'm sure they have a lot of good stuff that I might be less familiar with.
I actually just started using the fat medium to glaze, but I'm not exactly sure if I use that correctly or not.
I see. Well, I've used that in one of my demos, and it worked really well. So that one is definitely a nice material. All right, so what we have here, as you notice, a more neutral area, a more yellow area, a more brown area. So I'm just going over each one of these areas, and as I hope you're able to see, the results are very, very satisfying because everything that I have underneath is being preserved and just being amplified and enhanced by the power of the glaze. Don't we love the power of the glaze? And I can't wait to get to the lights, but patience is going to be merited and prudent. So if I haven't said so before, I think I did say so before, but I'm reminding you that if this takes me a little bit longer, I will stay beyond the hour. And Razlin, you don't have to stay, but everybody who wants to is more than welcome to hang out with me and watch me finish this thought process. Because I don't want to rush it. I want you to see exactly how it's properly done, just to get you all fired up on getting your glazes up and running. So the alizarin made an appearance here in the eye, and then directly above the eye, the red should probably stop because it goes yellow again. So I'm tuning into that yellow ochre once more. And the amount of medium is pretty high. As you might see on my palette, it looks as if I'm putting my brush into nothing. So it's really mostly medium with a pinch of pigment. We're like putting on very, very translucent coats. Very, very translucent. All right. And if there are any questions about that, now's a good time because I'm kind of going through the motions.
Yeah, we just have a question about the ratio of, let me go back up here really quick.
No worries.
How do we know the medium to paint ratio for the glaze?
As I said before, we don't. There is no way to know this in advance. And again, it's going to be different for every painting and for every surface that you're working on. What you want to note is that you want to touch your painting with what you mixed. And if it's wrong, stop. Just say, oh, okay, too much medium. Woo! Going back to my palette, putting more pigment in. Or alternatively, you put too much pigment and you put it on and you're like, whoa, whoa, not enough transparency, need more transparency. So you go back to your palette, put more medium in there, and then go back. Here, I'm gonna demonstrate this, okay? Here we go. So the tip of the nose needs to be kind of orange. So here, I'm gonna take this orange with no medium at all and put this right here. Oops, I still have a lot of medium on my brush. But here, boom. Oh God, not enough medium. So wrong. What do? Okay, we correct it. I dip my brush into medium, adjust, and adjust. And if it's still too much, paper towel, and undo, remove. You always want to be responsive to what's going on your painting. The worst thing that you could be doing is working, knowing something's going wrong, and doing nothing about it. I do see a lot of people who do that, who are like, yeah, you know, I felt like something was wrong, but I didn't know how to fix it, so I just continued. No, this is not about glazing. This is a more holistic thing about painting. You have to be scrutinizing your every move and notice when you're doing something that you know is causing the undesired effect to manifest. Just stop and say, why did this happen? Was I using too much medium? Was I using too little medium? Just try to analyze it and adjust. Do your best to make an alteration. Now let's use the correct amount. There we go. Very nice. Now here, this is a very interesting thing that Bouguereau did, because so commonly painters would really, you know, fall in love with how pink you could use, how much paint you could use at the tip of the nose. But Bouguereau is such a restrained painter. God, it's like if ever there was a restrained painter, and he's making it so gray. Damn. It's so inspiring because this is where painters usually go wild with the chroma, but he really doesn't do that. So we're going to follow in his footsteps. But soon we're going to get to use all those chromatic moments we're dreaming about in the ear. I can't wait for that. Now here I'm going to actually expand my shadow just a little bit. And it looks to me like this edge has a beautifully slightly higher chroma. So I'm dipping into my Venetian red a little bit and making this shadow, at least the edge of this shadow, a little bit more chromatic. So much fun. This coloring book is so much fun. And this would be a great time to answer another question if it arises.
So I do think I read one of the questions incorrectly. Actually, there was that question, but there is another one. So it says that you're mixing two mediums to make the medium that you're using. How do we know how much of each medium, not how much medium to paint? Does that make sense?
Yes, interesting question. So if I understand it correctly, you're asking basically, when do I choose to use my Neal Magnet and when do I choose to use my Galkit Slow Dry? And the answer to that is whether or not I want a liquidy texture in my paint, so like I want very long, flowy brush strokes, or whether or not I want to keep my brush strokes kind of more under control, shorter, more compressed, in which case I'm going to prefer to use my gel because my gel, of course, if I put it on my painting, it's not going to drip. So it gives me a different consistency to my paint. So for example, here I really was preferring to use more of the liquid because I really want to be able to make something here that kind of melts into each other. But here, when I needed a little bit more control to control this, these drawing elements right around the eye so that I don't completely lose my shapes, I prefer to use my gel. So it has nothing to do with the colors. It has more to do with how I want my paint to behave. Does that make sense?
I believe you answered that.
Brilliant. So now this exceedingly chromatic moment, I'm going to be, do you know what chutzpah is? I'm going to be brash and literally put cadmium red light directly from the tube, but I'm putting it transparently enough so that it's mixing with the gray underneath and not causing a whole chromatic emergency, hopefully. And as you will soon see when I'm done with the shadows and go into the lights, the power of the glaze to create an impact is stronger in the shadows than it is in the lights. In the lights, like in the shadows, very, very frequently, you're going to find that right after you do the glaze, you're going to be satisfied with the color, and you could kind of leave it that way until the end of the painting. With the lights, it would take a little bit of a miracle for that to happen, because something that is very kind of common to the glaze effect is that it looks a little bit timid, a little bit mysterious, a little bit, I guess, smooth. And at least to my taste, I like my light sources to be a little bolder, chunkier, like boldly applied with more texture, stuff that you can't really do in a glaze. So what I really enjoy doing, and I hope I'll get to do it with you today, is I like to paint directly into my glaze with colors that I mix for direct painting. So hopefully we're going to get there, because that's going to be really fun. All right, so let's just get this done. This is pretty chromatic, pretty red. All right, beautiful, beautiful. Now, before we get into the beard and stuff like that, let's try to get the light colors in here. The interesting part. So I have done myself a disservice by not putting raw sienna on my palette. I don't know why I did that. Raw sienna would have come very helpful. So I'm going to mix a kind of raw sienna, which is a lower chroma, darker version of yellow ochre that leans a little bit more towards red, something like that. This would have been perfectly raw sienna. And I'm going to get into this. Okay, see this? See this? This is a mistake. Not enough medium. So as soon as I touch just a little bit, I'm like, okay, bad move. Much more medium necessary. Mixing it with much more medium. Much better. So I'm identifying this muted yellowy color over here, mixing it into the shadow, slightly above the eyebrow. There we go. Now here, what you're seeing here, this breaking apart, that's how it looks when you put too much medium. So I'm taking actual pigment and putting it into that glaze because I don't want it breaking apart on me. Now, take some burnt sienna and adjust this edge to make it a little bit more orange. So this transition into the yellow has an orangey transition towards it. And I'm gonna move into my lights. Now here I'm gonna need a lot of medium. And I'm finding it kind of difficult to determine what these lights are, but they look pretty orange overall. So I'm gonna start with an orange glaze. That'll be my starting point, and then I'll see where I go from there. And because I'm putting it down very, very thinly, that orange is not, you know, becoming crazily chromatic because the monochrome from underneath, the black and white, are muting that chroma down. So you'll see what we're ending up getting is a kind of skin tone, workable skin tone, just by putting down my orange very, very transparently. So hopefully, I can't hear your sound, but this would be the moment in my actual classroom where I hear wow. So you can privately go wow in your living room, or don't go wow and ask me questions.
I'm wowing.
Right? It kind of works. And it works very easily, which is fun. Are there any questions so far, Raven?
Yes, so it says, was last week a grisaille or direct painting? Is the glaze the last phase of this?
Grisaille is a form of direct painting. So yes to both. It was a grisaille and it was direct painting. Because direct painting, at least when I use the term, is any kind of painting where I mix the color that I want to achieve on the palette and apply it to the painting. So right now, this color that you see on the painting is not the color I mixed on the palette. The color I had on the palette is pure orange. And what you're seeing here is not pure orange. This is why this is indirect painting, because the color here is mixing into whatever is underneath it. So this is indirect painting. But my grisaille was 100% direct painting. I mixed every value on my palette and applied it to my painting directly. So yes to both. And the second question, is the glaze the end? No, never, ever, no. For the reasons that I outlined before, because as I said, the glaze, you know, brings you pretty close to the color that you're gonna need, but it almost never brings you 100%, at least in the lights. It does a better job bringing you close in the shadows, but for my personal taste, it almost always, the lights almost always require further treatment. How are we having fun so far? You guys can thank Raslin for coming on at very short notice to help us with this lesson. So I'm very grateful, Raslin. You're doing a terrific job and I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm having fun watching you.
Well, hope to see you next week. More of this orange. And you see everything that's going on here, you know, there's a lot of sophistication happening in terms of the values, but that's already established from the previous layer. So I can just comfortably not care. Not care, you know, I've already solved it in the other lesson, and I'm just cruising through. So this is the benefit of glazing. If you have a layer underneath that works, glazing is going to be so fun. But if you have a layer underneath that doesn't work, that needs addressing, and you're going to fake it and try to glaze anyway, you're going to regret it. Because, again, the success of these colors is only going to happen if the values underneath and the shapes underneath are satisfactory. If they're not, the glaze is going to 100% fail. Look, I'm taking cadmium red light directly from the tube, but I'm putting it on with such, you know, high amount of medium that it just becomes this conveniently muted pink. You know, I didn't even do any work in order to mute this pink. It just became muted in the interaction with the medium and then my monochrome. Very, very, very convenient. And as you can see, I'm reaching out for this orange very often. I find it so valuable. That's why I mix it ahead of time, because I haven't found a pigment that does the job that this orange knows how to do so well. I love that orange. So if you want to, I want to trademark this orange. Can we call it Goshen orange, which is like ochre plus cadmium red light? If somebody asks you, what's that orange? You can say it's Goshen orange. It's my orange. Love it. Some more cadmium red light for this area. Boost up the chroma just a bit. And we're cruising. Cruising, cruising. Having fun. So you see, it brings me very, very, very close to where I'm going to need to be in terms of skin tones. But I don't know if you're sensitive to this as much as I am. It looks a little too dim, a little too tanned. It always makes people look very, very like they've been in the sun for too long, the glaze. So you usually end up needing to mix a few more colors directly to put on top of the glaze, just to make these people feel a little healthier. You know, they look a little sunburned when you. That's why I don't want to call the glaze the last stage, because, you know, he doesn't need to look so sunburned, and we can only rescue him from that in direct painting, because glaze, the only thing, you know, the downside of glazing is that it drops the value no matter what you do, and sometimes you need to maintain that crispy high value, and glazing will just not allow it. So it's important not to try to pretend that the glaze can do what it cannot do. But it's, again, it's an extremely useful technique for taking something very far in a really easy way, because I'm barely mixing colors. I'm barely mixing them. I'm just because the primary objective of mixing a color is always hit the value right. You know, that's the most important thing. And the value is already going to be right. You know, I'm going to have to work very hard to mess up the value right now, because I've already mixed it correctly in the previous lesson. So right now, the glazing is just providing me with a good platform for achieving the chroma and the hue in a very convenient way. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them now.
Yeah, so we just have a question of if you could go over the colors that you're using.
Yes, the colors on my palette.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna list them again. It's from right to left. Let me just put that black in just to pretend we're doing the eyes. Flake white. ivory black, burnt umber, raw umber, viridian green, which I've put on and have never used yet, so it's most likely that I'm not gonna end up using viridian green, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, Venetian red, yellow ochre, cadmium red light, and this orange is a mix between yellow ochre and cadmium red light. And I'm going to remind everybody that I'm going to try to get you the recording of this lesson later tonight. So anybody who's been frantically trying to take notes, what colors is he using? You know, you can watch the replay, slow motion, cadmium red light. And you can hear me list that whole list really, really slowly, as many times as you can play the recording in a row. And I'll make it available for all of you to watch for about a week until next lesson, so that for next lesson, you'll fully remember everything that transpired on that faithful Thursday afternoon. So you'll be, you know, all ready to go for next time when I prove that colors can be much better than what the glaze allows, and that there's a lot of improvement that can still be done to this painting. Sounds good? Talking to the wall. It's okay. I know you guys say good, say yes. I can hear it through the grapevine. See, that's definitely way too orange. Why is it way too orange, people? Not enough medium. So we adjust. We take medium on the brush and adjust. Adjust, adjust, adjust. Nice, nice, nice. So much fun. Glazing is like magic. You barely put any work in. It just happens. Trust me, that's exactly what the old masters were after. They had to paint a million commissions. They had no time. They were all about, get me that technique that works, that does what I needed to do, fast. That's why you see so much glazing in the old master techniques. Sometimes you'll see like a painting that's 85% glazing with just a few final touches and send it away to the Medici. Don't want to see it anymore. Get it out of my studio. This whole ear was cadmium red out of the tube. Really nothing else in it. Whoops, way too much. But you see, if you're following the reference image, you're seeing that what I'm getting here is too dark, you know? What I'm getting here in the ear. I'm not successfully maintaining that light value. That's why this is gonna need some more attention after the glazing stage. I'm gonna need to bring those values up. That's what a glaze always does. Brings your values down a little bit too much. Some areas that's okay, but in other areas, totally not okay. And for those of you who were here when I was doing the Grisaille, I do believe I was responsible enough to mention that when you're planning on glazing a painting, you want to err on making your Grisaille too light and not too dark. And this is the exact reason why, because if your Grisaille is slightly too light, the glaze is going to happily take care of it. But if your Grisaille is too dark, good luck glazing that. That's not going to work. All right, this is fun. Now let's see what I can do with that beard. I feel like if I continue using this small brush, that beard's gonna take me forever. See if I got something bigger. Didn't I bring that one? I take this one. And some little brush right there. All right, so the beard. Orange and some burnt umber in there, a lot of medium, of course. Let's try and get that orange vibe. Now, some of these areas in the beard are very chromatic, while others are very muted. So it's pretty important to try to keep tabs on which is which. So here we have a shadow that's pretty chromatic, pretty red. I put some alizarin in there, and the alizarin's got your back when you need some chromatic shadow, because if you hit those umbers will immediately drop your chroma close to zero. So alizarin's your friend when it comes to chromatic darks. And then at the edge, it goes a little bit more yellow. So getting that yellow in there. And I'm gonna fix up this drawing one day when I get back into the background and I can push back against all of this wild stuff that I'm putting on there right now. How's the question front going? Anything coming up?
It looks like we've addressed most of them. There was one question about the lighting. If there is it just the light, or are the lights more chromatic in your painting than in the photo of, I'm going to butcher the name.
Bouguereau.
Yes, Bouguereau.
It could be that my my lights are a little more chromatic, but I suspect they aren't. I just suspect what happened is that they, as I said, dropped a little bit in value, and it's not necessarily that they're more chromatic, but they're just a little too dark. And that's exactly why I said that these lights, you know, as close as they are to what they need to be, they're still imperfect, and they will require more treatment. They want attention, and we're going to have to give them some attention. Like, for example, here, I have a perfectly gray part of the beard. It's going to be almost impossible to express that with a glaze, because a glaze almost always gives you some degree of chroma. A glaze comes in and wants to just destroy all the grays. It's just like the agent of chroma. So it's likely that this happened in multiple places. And when I get back to it, it will have to be addressed, no doubt. So here is again quite difficult because I don't want to make it too chromatic. It's hard. That's the difficult part about the glaze. You always, when you try to keep the chroma low, it's kind of difficult. So he's turning out to be more blonde than he necessarily thought he was. But he will have to be patient, because in real life, I might not glaze this, but I'm just trying to push the extent of the technique to show you both the benefits and the flaws, so that you can see where the technique kind of fails. So this articulation of grays is where it starts to fail, but I'm trying to remove some of the glaze over here to hopefully expose a little bit of the grisaille underneath to maybe preserve some of that grayness, but it's a little bit of a lost cause. It's okay. I'll fix it later. Okay. That's looking pretty sharp. Let's try to get at the bottom part of the beard. So the bottom part of the beard really is very, very gray. So this is going to be the most mist color of them all, I predict. See how gray I can maintain it. Oh, not a bad job. Not too bad, not too bad. Okay. That's pretty cool. Now we have the hair on his head. And then we'll see where we stand. Could be that I'm not going to have time to paint into the glaze today, but if we don't, you'll see the rest of this next week. I'm excited to do that. Let's get the bottom here. The bottom is nice, chromatic, warm, some burnt umber, some alizarin. Take care of this shadow over here. And next to it, kind of stops being so dark, so we'll add some burnt sienna into the mix. Some black to counter this chroma. Let's get this done. Great. So if I haven't said it this far, and I think I haven't, and this is sheer malpractice on my part, in a glaze, please, to all of you who've lost concentration, maintain it for this 1 minute. In a glaze, we do not use white. Repeat after me. In a glaze, we do not use white. Why is that? Glazes are very heavily dependent on transparency. And what is the most opaque paint ever made? White. So if we put white into our glaze, we are compromising our ability to play with transparency to a frightening degree, which is why, everybody repeat after me, we do not use white in glazing. So Ken, why is there white on your palette? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's because I thought I might have time to continue the rest of it, but it looks less likely because we're almost at the hour mark and I haven't done the hair yet. How are we doing on questions?
So we do have one question about, do the umbers drop value so much because they are more opaque?
I don't understand the question. Drop value so much of what? Please try to write that again. I'm sorry. But the answer to your question, no matter what it is almost 100% no, just because umbers are not opaque. Umbers are very transparent pigments. But I still am curious to know what you meant. Do explain, if there's something to explain. Umbers drop a lot of value because they're dark. Unless I'm missing something about the nuance of the question.
Sorry, I think I accidentally muted myself.
Oh, I see, I see.
So it says, I think you use a sienna instead of raw umber because you said the value would drop too much.
Ah, yes, 100%, because sienna, as you can see on the palette, sienna is a lighter pigment than umber. Umber looks almost like black. So pigments are in different values when they come out of the tube. So it's not that the effect of burnt umber is dropping the value more than burnt sienna. They both drop the value in the exact same amount. It's just that burnt umber is a much lower value pigment. Now I understand. We're almost done with the glazing on the head. Aren't we all super psyched? And I'm gonna try to get that edge of the hair. Are you noticing how the edge of the hair with the background is kind of yellowy? I might be able to accomplish that. Could be. Not guaranteeing it, but it's possible. Let's try some yellow glaze on these edges. Maybe some orange glaze. That yellow glaze is looking a little green. Well, that's okay. I guess it's not perfect. It's going to be difficult to do without repainting the background because the glaze is kind of popping up against nothing because there's barely any paint on the background. It's painted way, 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 way too thinly. And this is also something that I was talking about in the previous lesson to everybody who attended, is I was saying you need to put your grisaille in a sufficiently opaque and thick way because a glaze on a thin coat of paint doesn't work. And here you can see exactly that when I'm trying to glaze, it works on the hair, but it doesn't work on the background because the background, the layer of paint is way too thin and the glaze just goes dim and disappears into nothing. So the only time when I'm going to be able to achieve this more chromatic edge is during the point where I readdress all this background fun times. Just trying to not necessarily go into the color per se, but more just going into it for the record so that my edges here aren't too sharp. This color is going to have to be repainted anyway because it's not exactly the correct shape. So I know we're out of time, but I'm so greedy and I want to show you how it looks like to paint directly into the glaze with direct painting that you mix. So I'm just going to mix a few colors to show you how that looks like. And Rosalind, I know that this is going over, so let us know if you have to go. And if so, if you could read out the last few questions, I'd appreciate it. And before you're good?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay, good.
So we did have one question, someone asking, I once heard that the face had a big amount of green. Is that true?
This is where I don't want to badmouth anybody else's teaching. No face has a big amount of anything. You know, colors have three properties: value, chroma, and hue. And the face has a lot of green if you're using all that green to reduce the chroma of all that red, right? Green is a fantastic color to use in order to reduce the chroma of red because it's directly oppositional to it on the color wheel. That's why a lot of painters use green in order to increase their ability to control the chroma of the red, which is the most common color to go out of control because it's so chromatic coming out of the tube. So people are scared of the chroma that red has, and that's why some people do a grisaille that instead of being gray, it's actually green. That's called verdaccio, and that is extremely helpful in modifying the chroma of reds. That doesn't mean that faces have green in them. It means that using green underneath red is a good way to control chroma. So I would be very, if I were teaching that, I would be kind of more careful with my words because I do walk around the world in less corona times and look at a lot of faces, and it's not like I see a lot of green people around me. But I do recognize the value of having green on the palette. As you can see, I put green on the palette, but today I didn't really need to use it at all because to control the value of the red, my gray underpainting was sufficient. But if it weren't sufficient and I would have found it difficult to control the chroma of the red, I might have resorted to using green. But again, just to sum this up, it's not because faces per se have red in them. Hope that made sense. Faces have nothing in them. Nothing has anything in them. All colors are just abstract entities. When you look at, a tomato to paint, it's likely that you'll find reds, but if you want to control the chroma of these reds, you could very happily mix that with green on the palette. It doesn't mean that tomatoes contain a lot of green, right? That's not the implication. It means tomatoes contain many variations of red, and in order to control variation of red, green comes in very handy. That would be a more precise way, in my opinion, to phrase that. Now let's say thank you to the glaze, and let me show you a little bit of what happens when you mix direct painting into a glaze. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. For longer videos, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/KenGoshen. For lessons, please visit my website at kengoshen.com/lessons. See you next time!